everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm sitting here with a rather lovely Mr. Mike Exeter. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be here.
I want a little bit of a journey. I want to know how you started. Earlier you told me you were actually an engineer, made things engineer.
Yeah, I worked for my dad. Straight from school, I became in electronics and computer tech. So I was doing robotics. It was like computer-controlled machine tools. And because I was really good on computers and logic stuff. And as part of it, I had to learn how to do tapping, threads and all this kind of stuff. So I really had a good background in that because I was a keyboard player and you couldn't get in bands as a keyboard player. Even though it was the 80s, I couldn't get in bands. And so it was like, what could I possibly do to get into the industry? So yeah, I started in engineering, and then there was a point I'm starting to see a means of possibly getting in here, applying my computer knowledge and musical knowledge.
Right.
And that took me to Full Sail in Florida because I wanted.
You came to Florida? Went to Florida?
I wanted to be a synclavist, as they called them.
Yes, I know what that is.
Because this New England digital machine, the synclavier, was the forerunner of digital audio workstations. And I cleverly thought, if I learn how to do this, then Trevor Horn's going to want to hire me. And not thinking that Steve Lipson was there already and he was really good. But it was that thing. And it drew me to Florida.
And JJ and Andy as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And the moment I got out to Florida, it was like I was in studios working on these NVRs, Neotechs, working with bands. And I was like, actually, this is really cool.
Well, what was the music? Was music you loved? Was it more keyboard based or was it guitar based?
Yeah, my dad, the first album I bought was actually Oliver's Army by Elvis Costello.
Nice.
And the first album Dad bought me, which was before that, was Journey to the Centre of the Earth by Rick Wakeman. He said, look at this album cover. I went, oh, that's cool. He said, this guy's pretty useful. You might like it. And there's Rick in a cape, gold cape, And I just loved that. And so I was between all those things.
I relate to all of that because my dad bought me a Night at the Opera.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I remember one Christmas, Bohemian Rhapsody was big. And my mum's brother bought Dad Night at the Opera on vinyl and cassette. Yeah. He could choose which one he wanted. And he had the cassette very stupidly, so I ended up ruining it in the car cassette player, because if he'd bought the album, we could have kept taping it.
Yeah.
But that was the other thing. So it was Queen. It was my third gig was Queen.
Really?
Rush was the first on the Moving Pictures tour. The second one was ELO. And the third one was Queen on the Hot Space tour.
I knew it was something I didn't like about you.
Yeah.
No, I'm just so jealous to see Queen at that point. Well, I didn't see him.
It's the there's a video of it live on fire at the Milton Keynes Bowl.
I am beyond envious.
Oh, it was brilliant. I saw him twice.
All three of those bands were like huge for me. Huge. That's so important.
Yeah. Oh, it was wonderful. I mean, it all went downhill after that with gigs. It was like, how can you beat that? And then Genesis, of course.
What year were Genesis?
Genesis was the ABBA tour.
That's still a great album.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I mean, Peter Gabriel's my favourite vocalist as an overall vocalist. And I'm just watching Brian Pern again. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's the Fast Show lot.
Right.
I'll tell you about it. It's brilliant. But yeah.
I've seen the Fast Show. I don't remember that.
Brian Pern is stunning. It's basically a complete piss take of the whole Peter Gabriel thing. But
like the kind of like the tiny little fringe kind of thing.
It's everything. It's the stage outfits.
Right.
And Peter Gabriel appears at the end of each series on a Segway. I mean, it's ludicrously funny. But so, yeah, I love that. I loved prog. I didn't really get into heavy stuff until later, a lot later.
Yeah. I had a similar journey. It was Night at the Opera.
Yeah.
Out of the Blue.
Yeah.
I love Breakfast in America.
Oh, yeah.
I love that album.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'll tell you my Out of the Blue story very quickly.
Please.
I had to do Tony's audiobook. So I recorded Bevan doing the voiceover of Tony's audiobook, and we were chatting about...
Bev did the
voice, because Tony didn't want to do it. So Bev and I he was sat in an armchair in Tony's living room. We were just chatting, and I recorded the whole audiobook. And during that, I said to him, I wore out Night of the Opera. And during the reading the book, he couldn't pronounce Dehumanizer, which is a Sabbath album.
Yeah.
All the way through, he kept going Dehuman. So I'd mentioned about Night at the Opera. He came in the one day and he brought me his second to last copy of Out of the Blue on vinyl, and he'd signed it to Mike Dehumanizer, Love Bev. So I've got Out of the Blue back.
Did you?
It was a great album.
On blue vinyl?
No, just normal.
Yeah.
Did you have the spaceship, the cardboard spaceship?
Yeah, I had the cardboard spaceship.
Sharon Osbourne's idea.
Was it really?
Yeah, she said we could do something really special with that. So she said, why don't we put a cardboard cutout spaceship in there?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Bev told me.
That's
brilliant.
That's absolutely amazing. Yeah, was her dad managing them?
Yeah,
at the time?
Don was Jet Records.
Yeah, I remember now. I remember, of course.
Yeah.
What an amazing time for music.
It was.
Because we had punk rock, new wave, and still had like prog, and all these prog bands were getting more pop. And
of course, right in the middle of it is my favourite band, Pink Floyd.
Yeah. Oh, The Wall.
But Animals is my favourite album because it's gritty and guttural and really and still so relevant.
Yeah, I agree.
It's brilliant. I saw Roger about 3 or 4 years ago.
I did too on that tour with the big, huge
Back to Super Stage. Yeah. So I had a really rounded upbringing. I mean, Dad, the mum and Dad are still alive, but he got me right into, they saw the Beatles supporting Roy Orbison. So music's been there all through my life,
That's amazing.
Great. It's really nice, yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Sidcup, just south of London, and moved around that area until 83. I went up and did A-levels up in Solihull area, around Birmingham.
Is there when you eventually started working for Sabbath, moving on quickly?
No.
Was there any of that? Oh, Solihull.
No. The funniest thing about Solihull is I was recording Neil Murray on a song for Tony, and he said, "Oh, where are you from then?" And I said, "Solihull." He goes, "Oh, that's rather footballers' wives, isn't it?" For anybody that doesn't know, it's a very posh place just outside of Birmingham. It's really posh. Yeah. But so no. Tony was now living in a Solihull borough, so he couldn't say anything.
Right.
But because he came from Aston, which was, as he put it, a bit of a shithole. So a very working man. And I guess he had a very similar thing 20 years before me. He was working in factories. So it's quite interesting.
So let's go back to going to Florida and going to Full Sail.
Yeah.
First of all, I didn't even know you could do that. Being in Britain, how did that even happen?
Well, they had the ability to do international students. You could get an international student visa and go out there. My other alternative, because there weren't many recording schools back in 1990. No. There was like the recording workshop in Ohio, I guess, if that's where it was, and probably Berkeley or something. Mm-hmm. Full Sail was really nice. It was in Florida. And my alternative was a suburb of Birmingham called Sandwell. And it was like, maybe Florida sounds nice for a year. So I was able to go. And it was because of the Sing Club here. New England Digital had an office in the UK at that point. And I phoned him. I said, how can I find out more about this? And he said, you should check out Full Sail. And they did a degree program. So it was like, now's probably the time to do this. So
in 1990.
Nice.
By the time
it was 91, and it was just after the first Gulf War. So it was quite a weird time to be coming out here, but it was great.
I wonder what happened to Sinclavier. They weren't able to sort of keep it.
Right, that summer they went bust and when the receivers came in, they found that they were still redecorating the bathrooms of head office in marble. Right. They'd completely overspent and just misjudged where this was all going, because it was only the following year that ADAC came out. Yeah. So there was a huge shift about to happen in many ways, because that was the year that Nirvana broke and killed hair metal.
Called hair metal and probably just that kind of production.
Yes, yeah. It needed it. It needed an enema, the music business, and Nirvana was it. Yeah. Yeah.
And, knowing guys of that genre and that period, all they wanted to be was Black Sabbath.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, isn't it?
There's a lot of them weren't, when we think grunge, we think of like a punk aesthetic, which of course it had. Yeah. But they wanted to be late 60s, early 70s rock, just raw and energetic.
Well, it had got to a certain point, hadn't it? I mean, you look back with 2020 hindsight and you look what happened with Priest, and it's like they went through this phase where it just got more and more reliant on grid and technology and drum machines and all this, and suddenly it's like, can we just not get a band to turn up and play? And that's, and Sabbath would have gone through that. Everybody went through it. It was like the fear of actually just playing.
Yeah.
I mean, thank God for Rage Against the Machine doing what they did.
Sure.
Again, it was a similar time. It was 91, wasn't it? I think their first album.
Yeah, and I think Alice in Chains as well. Yeah. Because Alice in Chains got lumped into grunge, and they probably could be considered grunge to some level, but they were a rock band, like an actual rock band.
And Soundgarden,
Soundgarden, another incredible rock band, yeah.
So that's what was needed, because it had become very much about the image and...
Yeah, the hair out here.
I mean, that was the 80s, wasn't it? Yeah.
Ozzy definitely had his time with shoulder pads, to be honest.
Yes, yeah. Yes, there's some pictures I think that a lot of people would
Blue, sparkled, shoulder paddy, very Crystal Carrington.
Yes.
For anybody who knows what that is.
Yes.
We got one person back there who knows what we're talking about. Yes.
As they called it here, Dynasty.
Dynasty. Yes.
It was Dynasty for us.
Dynasty for us.
An offshoot of Dallas, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Funny.
So, 91, you finish in Florida. Did you stay in America or did you go home?
Yes, I went up to a studio up in Rochester, New York for a year.
What was the studio?
It was a place called Dejalon. It was a bunch of people's names. And that ended up doing a joint thing with Power Station. So it became Power Station Rochester, I guess.
Yeah.
And my visa was coming to an end, so I...
because you get that 1 year where you can go and work,
Yeah, but I had some great things. I mean, I did a lot of, funnily enough, I ended up doing a load of churchy stuff, gospel, because they would bring the band, the gospel choirs in after church, and I'd be the youngster. It's like,
nice.
Let Mike do it. He's good. Stick a few mics up, and that was really inspiring. And they were bringing people in. Eddie Kramer came. One of my first sessions was Eddie Kramer came in to produce a band, and I tape hopped for him. And
how was that?
It was great. That was one of those defining moments where nobody else wanted to do it because they were so frightened of it. And I went, I don't care. I'll give it a go. And he did that. If we could just go in on, we need to do a punch. Go in on the third beat of the second bar of the first chorus. And then, nice punch. That's all you need,
Yeah.
I said, where are you going out? He goes, any snare drum.
Any snare drum.
I mean, why? He goes, because a snare drum's really white noise, so it'll mask your punch. I'm like, wow. Yeah. So just little things like that. It was great. It was really, it was quite confidence-inspiring doing it. And, we had some good people came through. Because Rochester's quite a music town for, Rochester, Eastman School of Music. Tony Levin and Steve Gadd studied there. They came through.
Fantastic.
Wow, Again, another hero. I was starting to work with people. Tony Levin had played on Pink Floyd's Momentary Lapse and all the Peter Gabriel stuff. Oh, yeah. So I was like...
Sledgehammer bass tone's still one of my favourite sounds. Yeah. What a bass sound.
Yeah. Great sounding album. And, I eat up classic albums. So watching Daniel Lanois talking about locking Peter Gabriel in the barn so he would finish his lyrics. Just shit like that I love.
Yeah. Yeah, Hugh told me with the Melt album that he was making other albums. She was making other albums in between because there'd just be these great long periods while Peter was trying to finish up ideas. So like, we can go and do this other album in the meantime. Yeah. And it's interesting. I'm famous for my tangents, but we were just talking. We were talking earlier about SSLs and about tracking with SSLs, and how in America that was never really was a thing. It was always. Track on a Neve or an API, then mix on an SSL. But you ask Hugh and Steve Lillywhite, they made all those records entirely on the SSL, tracking and mixing on it. Yeah. And some of the greatest records ever, the most inspirational sounding.
Oh, totally. I mean, I was lucky enough to do some stuff at the Townhouse. And,
you were?
Yeah, and in fact, I was over at Joe Barisi's the other day, and he's got the Studio One SSL.
And he modelled his live room on the Townhouse.
That's right, yeah. They're good. It doesn't always have to be. You respond to what comes through the speakers, don't you? So, if it needs a bit of EQ or something, great.
I have a pair of AR-18s back there, a few speakers.
Of course. I mean, that's the thing. And there was that thing with the SSLs where you'd put a Massenburg EQ across the stereo bus, so you wouldn't have to really worry about the top end that you were missing from the Neve.
Yeah.
There's just it's what it takes to get a record done, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think people aren't really fussed too much about I need this on a kick drum, this on a snare. I don't know if you know William Whitman.
Not personally, no.
I've only done podcasts with him, but he's brilliant. He's like, consoles are the way to make records. Yeah.
So 91, I suppose 92, Rochester.
And beginning of 93, came back to the UK.
And what happened then?
I was living in Solihull still. Well, I come back to live in Solihull, and I thought, write a few letters, various places. Start with Birmingham because then I won't have to move down to London. Immediately hit upon UB40, who had got they'd just done this album called Promises and Lies, which I think was in the middle of selling 7 to 10 million copies. Wow. They were out on a 2-year world tour. Their second engineer had a little hit of his own, so he was doing a solo thing. The first engineer, Jerry Parchment, did their front of house, so he'd gone off to do their world tour. So they've got this really nice studio, 2 rooms.
What was the hit single off that album?
Promises and Lies. There was one called Higher Ground. There was the Elvis song, Can't Help Falling in Love with You.
Right.
And there's a couple of others, but it was huge. You know, that really was their, is it the nadir? Their high point. So they didn't have anybody to run the studio, so I went in and freelanced, and they'd had a flood in their basement studio, which was their original one. They'd got a beautiful little AMAC Angela in there, so we tidied that up. And I said, I could make this my room. So I ended up doing lots of records down in Studio 2 on that. And we refitted upstairs, and it was just really nice. About 6-7 years, it was a really, really cool little 2-room facility. The best in Birmingham. It should have, it was the flagship studio in Birmingham. And that was good fun. So again, it was the time when people were still coming through Birmingham doing Pebble Mill, on a lunchtime. Sure. And Pebble Mill at 1. Wow. All these things where they needed studios. So I was sort of I was at the end of analog tape and budgets. Yeah. And so I cut my teeth doing edits and working the way we used to,
And how long were you there for?
I think it was probably till about 98, something like that.
So quite decent amount of time.
5-6 years, yeah. And I freelanced there for a bit as well. And then it was during that point that I was making an album that introduced me to Tony. So,
which album was that?
So my only album I've so far ever turned down doing was, I got an offer from Music for Nations, because I was the head engineer at this place by then. Cradle of Filth wanted to come and make a record. And they said they want someone to produce it. They've got an idea of what they want anyway, but they really need someone to and as you're the head engineer, will you do it? Oh, send me a DAT, I'll have a listen.
A DAT?
So I went through it, and actually I was doing some wiring. I'd taken some wiring looms home to just do, I can't remember what for. And I was sat in my front room listening to this as all the clouds came over and the sky went dark, and listening to these demos. And I went, nope. And I phoned him. I went, no, I'm not interested, thanks. And I left it at that. And they were managed by a lady called Faye Wolven, who had worked in the Sabbath camp. Her husband had been the right-hand man of Tony Visconti when he had Good Earth Studios in London. So he'd done all the Bowie stuff, Thin Lizzy. He'd done Magnum's first album, actually at UB40's place. So he came up and produced it. And he and I got on really well. And during that time,
did you engineer it still?
I played keyboards on it because I was doing stuff around the studio. And he said the keyboard player can't play. And I said, well, that's a shame, isn't it? He said, will you play keyboards? I went, well, yeah. He said, look, if we run you some slaves onto ADATs, will you orchestrate it? And I went, go on then. So I spent the summer orchestrating all of the stuff, and then I assisted him on the mix. And during that time, he said, I'm going to go over to see Tony Iommi. He lives nearby. He's got Don Airy, Glenn Hughes, and Dave Holland in doing some demos. I'm going to see if we can get him in here. So he brought him in. And Kit had to go off and do something else. And I ended up getting the call a couple of weeks later saying, Tony wants to do some more demos. Will you engineer it? I went, yeah, okay. And that was it.
Amazing. Well, that was 98, 99?
That was 96.
Oh, 96.
So I've worked with him for 26 years now.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
It's really cool. It's been good fun. Yeah.
So when Bob worked with him, were you working with him as well?
That was the only time he came over here to do that project because he needed to go and do some songwriting, and that stayed over here. So that's the only thing I haven't done with him.
Oh,
but
okay.
then I worked with Bob on the Fused album.
Great.
Which was his third solo one. So yeah,
Amazing.
I got to work with Bob. That was the one we did at the Townhouse. We recorded that at Rockfield, Mono Valley actually, and then we mixed at Townhouse.
Great. Yeah, Bob's a lovely
Bob's
guy.
hilarious. We'll see him tomorrow for a curry.
Yep, good idea.
Yeah. But yeah, we did it. We did an album. It was him. He produced it, and it was Tony, Glenn Hughes, and Kenny Aronoff. That was great fun.
Nice.
Yeah, that was good. Good.
And where was that?
That was at Mono Valley. That was the Fused album. So it was the first one Bob did with Tony was the one with all the different singers, and then the demos that we'd started when I first met Tony turned into an album in between, and then Fused happened, and that was great fun. Bob's hilarious.
Tape, Pro Tools. What sort of happened, or tape? I don't even know what DAW you use. I haven't asked you. But
Pro Tools, yeah.
Pro Tools. What was that kind of transition?
I did my first Pro Tools session when I lived back in Rochester, back in, I think it was at the end of '92.
So was that just to kind of do vocal comps and stuff like that?
Well, I was using Sound Tools. I was doing lots of 2-track editing.
Yeah.
And then I had to do a voiceover for someone. And it was like, well, we've got this new card. Let's install it into the Mac 2 FX. And with a 1 gigabyte hard drive, I think it was. And I just did this session. It was horrendous because it was Pro Deck and Pro Edit. So 2 different bits of software. Very quickly, they transitioned to version 2, which was better. Yeah. So I just kept up with it all along. But I remember I eventually did produce Cradle of Filth. So I was doing an album for them at Parr Street, and we had a Pro Tools rig. And I was doing all the edits, and I was like, quick, get it back on tape. Because it was like one of those where you're like, I do not trust this at all.
Right.
And we were running synchronizers and Blackburst and all sorts of stuff. The tape machine was... the tape machine wasn't driving Pro Tools. Pro Tools was driving the tape machine. So the tape machine had to have a synchronizer that would resolve to Pro Tools. So it was all quite complicated stuff that I like to forget about.
I remember those days, yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
But so I love the fact I did tape, but I don't miss it at all.
Nothing about it sonically you miss? Or?
Not really. I use Roger Meyer 456s, the little 500 things. They're great because they sort of deal with the peaks and bring up the RMS beautifully, but I can control how much I want to. In fact, I watched you on a panel with CJ Vanston a few years ago at NAMM, and I think he actually mentioned, or you may have said it about tape, nobody ever mentioned how warm tape sounded back in the day. We all just said, where's
the high end gone?
Yeah,
that's all we ever did.
Yeah, so I don't really miss it. I mean, it was easy, and it was definitely durable.
Yeah, that's well said. It was always a case of like, you get a great guitar sound, then you play it back and be like, where's all the high angle? So you just got so used to just boosting the top. Yeah. And you boost the top going into it.
Yeah. I was lucky. Depp was the name of UB40 studio. We had 2 24 tracks upstairs and a 24 track downstairs. They all had Dolby SR. So I was able to get away with 15 IPS with Dolby, which meant the bottom end was really nice and round. 15 sounded better on the bottom end. But then again, you lost out on other things. So, I watched a Frank Filippetti thing, and he's like, now I've got the choice what I do 15 IPS. I just use plugins and decide what I want. So I do like hitting things on the way in.
Me too.
I make decisions on the way in very much. My faders are always up at -5. I record to tape. I get my levels so that it sits. Because we used to broom handle. We'd go from studio to studio. It would be like, I want to take my tape across to the next room, do any cross-patching, and then push the faders up and be ready to overdub with the singer.
Yep.
None of this, I've got to spend 20 minutes getting a mix. So we'd record with the levels to tape.
Yeah, Joe Ciccarelli said to me, because he started, late 70s with Zappa.
Yeah.
He's like, you didn't know who was going to get your tape to do a vocal overdub or something, and you wanted to impress them.
Yeah, absolutely.
You wanted just to be able to open it up and go, wow, this sounds great.
Absolutely.
Not open it up and spend half an hour trying to get a song out of it.
Well, my favourite early credit was being alongside Tom Lord Alge for additional engineering. I did an album. I did all the brass recording on an album by this band called General Public, which was Dave Wakelin and Rankin Roger.
Yeah, amazing band.
And it was the first project that Jerry Harrison had done after Crash Test Dummies had been the big one. So
I always wonder what happened to Jerry.
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean,
but he was brilliant. He was really prolific.
Yeah.
And they did this. Then the two guys came over and we recorded. And I just kept having these notes. Well, it wasn't email. It was phone calls and faxes from the engineer going, "Please don't erase the time code track because everything's like syncing up. This is a slave." But it was great because you know those were fun days. You know, you'd get a tape would arrive FedEx and you'd open it up and wow, what have they been working on? You know, and it was that thing. I made sure that my brass recording sounded incredible. Because some guy was going to send it to Tom Lord Algie to mix, you know. Yeah. So it was really, you know, you made, well, you still do. You try to clean stuff up. You still do, but it is frustrating when you open somebody's session and there's 12 tracks called audio. Well, we got good also. We got good at spot erasing. There was a function on the Atari machines, the Atari MTR 90s, where you could, if you were a bit wary of punching, or there was just something to clean up, you could get the Chinograph out, find the point, mark the beginning and the end of something you needed to clean, put that track into record, hit a couple of buttons, and wipe the tape over the erase head, and it would just spot erase that section. So you got really good at making sure everything was pristine. Nice. All those things, you know, you don't have to think about now. Yep. Thank God. Yeah, yeah. Now you can be like, I didn't like that, I'll just undo the edit. Exactly. Oh, yeah. On another playlist. On another playlist, yeah. I can remember, like, missing a little piece of, you know, taking out a piece of the guitar solo that we wanted to keep. Yeah. My worst one was when at very early days was I was recording an entire band and they were all like, yeah, okay, cool, brilliant. And bass player packed his bag and he went off and the keyboard player went, any chance I could just punch in? And someone was distracting me, that's my excuse. And I went, yeah, go on then. And I did something and it was a Sony analog machine, APR 24. And I punched in on all 24 tracks, just for a quarter of a second. But I went, get the bass player, gang punch. Yeah. It was nerve-wracking stuff, you know. I never did it again. I had that with the Bangles and ADAT machines, and I lost sync. And actually, I didn't have that many problems on ADATs. When people complain about ADATs, they were brilliant. They were brilliant, especially coming from like cassette. Yeah. ADATs was like, I made some good records on that. But we lost sync. I can't remember why. It was probably my fault. And I had to do a full band punch for like the same thing for like half a second. That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, you have to do what you have to do. I think it was studio manager, he was Nashville, so he's like, they do that all the time in Nashville, just gang punch, you know, which was just brilliant. When you find these things, you know, you can do these things. It's not the mistakes you make, it's how you get out of them in the context. Yeah, and how you handle it. Yeah. It can be a joke. Yeah. And I remember in that situation, they thought it was the funniest thing ever. Yeah, I'd screwed up and they'd lost a second of their song. Yeah. They just thought they had enjoyed teasing me, so yeah. Yeah, it's definitely how you handle it. I mean, these guys, he knows, we've talked about this 100 times. If something goes wrong, it's just like, hey, you know. Yeah. Well, there's a funny one. Glenn Tipton from Judas Priest, they were recording I think it was Mono Valley again. There used to be a tech at Rockfield and Mono Valley called Otto, German guy, and he went in one morning and he was lining up and went through the record pad and recorded about 30 seconds of tones over one of their tapes that they'd spent all the previous day trying to work on. And he wrote this note. Glenn had it up in his studio for years, and it was like, it appears that I have recorded over the first 30 seconds of your tape. So sorry for this, Otto. And it was like, they couldn't be mad at him because something hadn't been labelled properly. But don't leave a tape on the machine overnight, you know. Yeah, I've heard stories like that before. I mean, there's what's the Zeppelin song where it comes in kind of on a random beat because they I'm going to paraphrase the story, and people are going to correct me. Feel free to correct me, but I feel like it was one of those kind of classic Jimmy Page who'd record the album in 36 hours because he was owed some time in the studio or something. So there may have been some powders involved in staying awake. And I think the story goes that the organ intro, you sort of hear you hear the click, 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 and then the organ comes in, and it probably was Glyn Johns realises after a couple of seconds that he's just gone into record on all 8 tracks and comes out. And so you hear this kind of like, and it's cool. It's like, oh my God, it came in on like a weird beat. Oh yeah. Yeah, because he erased the front of the song. Well, isn't that the fun bit? That's one of the psychological things that you go through with people is you say, look, all this stuff that you're worrying about is really irrelevant because when it's all good. It's a taste thing. So when I listen to, say, Animals, my favourite album, as far as I'm concerned, that's how it was always meant to be. I don't care about the arguments that went on. I don't know if any of that is a mistake. I just know that as the album. And you could go mental trying to perfect stuff. In the early days, I would go, I'd love to get hold of those multi-tracks. And now I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere near them. Right. I want that to be the album the way I remember it. Yeah. It's almost ghoulish getting the Bohemian Rhapsody multi-tracks. It's interesting, but it's like, I don't know if I want to hear behind the scenes.
You know what's so weird? I understand that. I do actually like the multi-track experience. Just because when you're solo Freddie, it doesn't disappoint. Yeah. It doesn't, like Killer Queen. Not that I'm saying I've got those multi-tracks, but
I think we all know that they're out there.
The doubling of the grand piano with the tack piano is you can't believe a human being can play that tight and with that kind of feel.
And without clicks as well. You know, and the entire section of the opera section of Bo Rap, where it's just like there's nothing. And then there's a bit more piano. And it's all this internal chronometer of his making it. Yeah, it's just brilliant. That's true genius.
Freddie's Folly, as they called it at the time.
Yes.
Yeah. No, absolutely amazing. We could go on this massive tangent for hours because it's really, really super exciting. I mean, Killer Queen, the guitar solo section, it's all on stereo tracks. You know, deal, 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 all these harmony guitars pounding left and right.
Yeah.
Just ridiculous. All on the pair. And then Anytime! There's like 16-part harmony, just on a fader. Yeah. Anytime!
It's stunning, isn't it? I think that's one, again, you look back at old track sheets. I did this one record with Glenn Hughes and he said, I've got loads of backing vocals I want to do. So before you give Tony too many guitars or leads or whatever, can I just have the tracks? And I'm like, yeah, of course. So in his mind, he had like probably 10 tracks to work with and he did all the highs and then we bounced those and then we had a few less to work with. And he'd got it in his head how we were going to make it come down to eventually a pair of backing vocals.
Incredible.
And then Tony could have his tracks. It was like just that thought process of how you would do that. I mean, Les Paul did it originally, didn't he, with sound on sound? You know, that's the thing. But and he did it by the brightest tracks went down first because by the time the bounces happened, they'd be duller. And you know that incredible organisation. It's really cool. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely amazing.
And I say I don't geek out. But
you geek out. It's all right. We can geek out. So you meet Tony. What was the first record you did with him?
Well, it would have been the Depp sessions. It was called because it was recorded at Depp. And then Fused, and then I guess it was the call. We did a load of demo stuff, and then he phoned me and he said, "Oh, we're probably going to do something with Ronnie." And I went, "Ronnie who?" And that would have been in 2006. And he said, "Yeah, you know, Dio." I thought, well, they're not talking, are they? Yeah. And apparently Geezer had gone up and played with Ronnie, and they'd said the record label were going to do a box set of the Dio years, and they said, "Have you got any outtakes?" And at this point, they were like, "Well, why don't we see if we can come up with something?" So we did the best of and did 3 new songs for that. And again, just being in a room. The first day, I walked in and Ronnie sat in the corner in his favourite jacket, which was this sheepskin Afghan hound thing. With a glass of wine, and he just gets up and he goes, "Ronnie." You know how they do that, and you go, you don't want to go, "Yeah, I think I know."
I think I know who you are.
Planty did that to me while we were making the album. He goes, "Robert," and I'm like, "Mike." But Ronnie was brilliant, and that whole first afternoon was just stories, and then we get to work and more stories, and that was fantastic. We kind of did that in between Ronnie's touring things. So yeah, that was good. And then that led into a tour and I went off and did mine. So in between, I'm doing my own stuff. I'm doing various freelancey things and, you know.
Amazing. Where did you meet Robert Plant?
That was during the recording of The Devil You Know. That was at Rockfield. He was paying his son's bill. And I'd gone off to do something and I walked back in the control room and Robert's there with Geezer having a chat. And we just sat down and, you know, again, it's one of those moments where you listen and wait to be brought in, and Robert was lovely, you know, and we just talked for a good hour, and he was talking about doing the Alison Krauss thing. They'd just done the Zeppelin reunion thing with Jason, and he had some funny stories about that. He's like, it's not really me anymore, you know, it's all this blah, blah.
Yeah.
He goes, I just want to sing country, or, you know, whatever it is I do. And he was really funny.
What about Jeff Beck? Because they always individually always talk about Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff was managed by Tony's manager for a while, for quite a long time, actually. Yeah, he's a funny guy, Jeff. I did one session with him. It was amazing. It was on a Cyndi Lauper session. Well, it was a song they'd written together, and I went in and did Jeff's guitar on it. And everybody's in awe of Jeff. Tony's like, oh, he's a brilliant player. Because that's lovely. That's really nice to hear. It's like we talk about Blackmore, because I've worked with Gillan, Glenn Hughes, Ronnie, who all sang for Blackmore. And you hear all those stories, and Tony's always there, like, great player. You know, really respectful of all the guitarists. Yeah. And Jeff's the king of it. You know,
I remember the Sunday Times, maybe early mid-80s. They had all of the great British guitar players, and they said, "Who's your favourite guitar player?" And almost all of them said Jeff Beck.
Yeah, he's brilliant, and he played a brilliant solo on Roger Waters' "Amused to Death" album.
Oh God, yeah, brings you to tears.
What God Wants Part 3, I think, or 2.
I talk about it all the time. Yeah.
Well, that's one of my favourite albums to listen to, because it was done in Q sound, so it's like this huge enveloping thing. And when I was with Jeff, I said, it's amazing. He can't do that without you, can he? He goes, nope, nobody can do that live. And
now, I was told by one of my mutual friends of Jeff's and me that Roger humiliated and worked him so hard for that solo.
Really?
Yeah, like really beat him up to get that solo out of him.
It's stunning.
And it is probably one of the best guitar solos I've been ever.
It is brilliant, and he's got the audacity to put a Welsh male voice choir behind it. It's like, how can it get any bigger? Oh, it's Roger Waters. Of course it's going to get bigger. You know? It's just stunning. Great stuff.
Yeah, it brings you to tears.
Yeah.
And the story goes is that he wanted it to be so emotional, so he needed Jeff to feel that.
Yeah.
Now, when I met Jeff Beck, I didn't ask him.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love that stuff, because I remember Pat Leonard produced that, and it was a bit of an odd one for him, but it was one of those moments, you read it in Mix magazine, and he's like, we had to listen to that album from start to finish every time towards the end of the mix, like for the last couple of weeks, because you have to hear the transition from the start all the way through to get the idea of the story and how the effects work. And again, every crossfade, everything that's going on are second generation bounces between multi-tracks. This was pre-digital workstations. Yeah. You know, it's a masterpiece of engineering.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
Absolutely. Who was the engineer on that?
It might have been Guthrie, because he goes between the two camps quite a lot. Yeah.
I think Andy did one Pink Floyd and ended up in the Dave camp.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But everybody who works with them is obviously the best of the best.
Yeah.
Incredible. The Wall was a big deal for me when you.
It was huge for me. Yeah. But it was brilliant.
It's hard to explain to people, but when Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 came out, every kid loved it. It doesn't matter if they were a mod or a rocker, because Quadrophenia was big at that period. So I don't know about your school, but my school was like, it was either mod or rockers. Everybody loved that song.
It was brilliant, because it was, we don't need no
education. We don't need no thought control.
Let's say I'm a Pink Floyd, but it was the number one across 2 decades. It was 1979 to 1980, so it spanned that, and I think it really upset the Sex Pistols, didn't it? Because they had their "We Hate Pink Floyd" T-shirts and all sorts. Yeah, and then Pink Floyd come out with one of the most one of the best anti-establishment kind of songs ever. And it was really lovely actually to see the Wall shows when Roger brought them back about, I don't know, 10 years ago, whenever it was. They were incredible. It was like, wow, I saw the one at Earl's Court in the first place. Oh, see, I never got to that one. Yeah, but you had me beat because you'd already seen Queen, ELO, and what was the other? Genesis, and Rush and Rush Pictures. Yeah. So I got one. I got 1 to your 4. I saw Dave Gilmour at Hammersmith Odeon on the About Face tour. Nice. Yeah, that was good, and because they just split, or Roger had now declared the band morally bankrupt. So he went off. He did the pros and cons of hitchhiking. So on stage, Eric Clapton. I can't remember the sax player, Andy Newmark on drums, and Michael Kamen on keyboards.
Wow,
it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was the Wall outtakes, that album. Totally different story.
Absolutely
but they were brilliant times. It was being a Pink Floyd fan, it was like, oh my God, I get to see 2 gigs.
Yeah.
And that was funny because who was it that Mick Ralphs played with Dave Gilmour? He was the second guitarist.
Oh yeah.
And Billy Bragg opened. Billy Bragg opened, and he did Arnold Lane. It was just like, it was brilliant. He really got the sense of occasion.
It's just odd.
Yeah, what a great time. Because you go to festivals at that period and you could have, now it's so, it's a heavy rock festival, it's a pop, it's an EDM festival. I just remember like Reading was everything.
Yeah.
It was like, you could have like a new wavy punk band and then a metal band either before or after. It was just all about good music.
It was.
Yeah, the guy we've just been with, my friend of mine, Ben Fowle, he was at Cal Jam in '74, and he was like, it was just one band after another, great music all the way through, because that's what people wanted. And I mean, to a certain extent people do, but I find that there's like these small metal fans. I'm not really a metaler, I'm very much into rock, classic rock and anything good. And it was like last year, because Priest were playing, I went to Bloodstock, which is a small one in Derbyshire. This year, it's like 3 days of bands I can't pronounce. It's like, I have no idea who they are, and it's all gritty, really leaves me cold.
Priest's drummer is amazing.
Scott's awesome.
So good, isn't he?
He's
a giant as well.
He is.
He's like 6'6" or 6'5" or something.
Yeah.
And I met him, I was like, hello.
He's really dry as well. People think he's miserable, and he so isn't. He's
such an incredible drummer.
He's brilliant. Yeah, he's great. He's so powerful, and he just constantly eats because he's he's awesome. Good player. Yeah, really exciting.
I saw him last time they were in LA. I think it was 2019, just before the pandemic. And wow, I could not believe how good he was. And he just drives that band. And then, of course, Andy Sneap's
Sneap's funny.
Holds it down.
Yeah, he's great. He's I've known him for probably over 20 years now. Yeah, he's
super humble.
He is.
I got backstage, so I'm sort of in awe because Judas Priest is our age group. So I'm just like, British Steel was like a huge album when we were kids, and so I'm backstage, and Andy's up at the bar. And I'd never met him at that point. And he points to me and he waves, and then he comes running over. Oh, I love what you're doing. And I'm like, dude, you're Andy Sneap. I'm nobody.
No, he's funny actually. He's humble, but he's also very shy.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like people to know he's a nice guy.
He's doing metal.
He's really funny like that. He's almost unapproachable. I think he's just shy. I would imagine doing the Priest things really helped with that, because he's now understanding how much what he's doing means to people.
Yeah, he's a phenomenal guitar player.
He is. He's great. He's a brilliant engineer and producer and mixer as well.
Insane.
He did Petrucci's solo album, so it wasn't surprising he then got the Dream Theater mixed. It's like
ridiculously talented.
He does faff though. He'll be there on Christmas Day recording something after it's gone out. But he's ace. That makes me
like him even more.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Relate. Yeah, ridiculously talented. 2006.
Oh God, are we only there?
Say again?
We're just there.
We're getting there.
2006.
2006. So.
So that was the Dio years, and then I went on and did more stuff, and then the only time I ever saw Ronnie play with them was the final gig at the Birmingham NEC, the arena now. And it was the final show of the tour, and Ronnie said, so are we doing this album then? I went, are we? I thought it was just, that was it, the tour. He goes, no, I think we should do an album, and everybody had agreed. So we started writing right away in January of 2008. Tony and I putting the riffs together and creating demos and everything, and we did about a month of that. Ronnie came over, did a little bit more, and then we shipped out here and started doing writing sessions. And by the end of the year, we'd got an album together, and it was decided, well, we've been over to LA a lot, so let's record it somewhere in Europe. And so we ended up at Rockfield, as Ronnie put it, the scene of the crime, because that's where they did Dehumanizer. all those years ago. So it was like a natural thing. They did dehumanize her, didn't talk for 20 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we went back to Rockfield.
And how was the atmosphere there?
It was awesome. It was really good. Ronnie was just brilliant. He would just work hard. He was a real buoyant person. He was really.
He knew he was dying of cancer at that point.
He didn't. And he was keeping it very quiet if he did.
Oh wow.
Yeah. He was just. He sort of ignored that kind of stuff. He's like, I'm going to keep singing because that's my job. I can't have a day off. I've got a bit of a stomach ache. That's probably because I eat shit, all this. And he would just get through it. But the most focused person you could ever want to meet, phenomenal at coming up with vocal parts and lyrics and the humility of running it by people. It'd be like, the song that we did a couple of years before, he's like, this song's called Ear in the Wall. And he told me the story of this mental bloke who could see an ear in the wall. And this whole song was about him having a bit of a breakdown. And then at the end he goes, no, you can see it because it's right next to the eye in the wall. And it was like this little twist of humour. And I'm going, what are you on? But he was brilliant, really creative. And he came up with some fantastic concepts. A bit like Geezer. Great storytellers, the pair of them, really clever, and just a gentleman and an incredible singer. It was just a joy to record him.
Geezer, you just touched on, is not even probably, I think, is the most underrated player ever.
Yeah, he's sort of my hero because I play the bass in the studio when we're writing, and I go, over to you, mate. These are your songs now. He's like, oh, you've done a pretty good job so far. I like what you've done. And he's so lowly and embarrassed about everything. And he comes up with these things and he works really hard. I'd go past his room to go and get something from my bedroom at Rockfield, and I would just hear him practicing, writing, nailing these parts because he knew he was going to come in and play the next song the next morning. Just working on what would be interesting, always looking for that thing, always working with Vinny Appice, the drummer, to come up with interesting things that would follow what Tony was doing. And
I just think of the first time I heard Sabbath 1, the first album, just that little instrumental part before NIB where he's just I mean, to me that's like the birth of heavy metal bass playing.
Yeah, he is. He's absolutely brilliant, and he knows what he wants. He needs telling that it's okay as well. It's like, well, I don't know, do you think I could do it better? It's like, no, that's brilliant. Listen to it, check it out. Oh yeah, I suppose it's good. It's just that thing of like, he doesn't really know how good he is. And that's lovely. It's that almost that, I don't know what the word is. Yeah, he doesn't get how good he is.
Would you say he's a big riff writer in the band as well?
Not so much with Tony. Tony just brings so many riffs to it that Geezer will say what he likes and then work stuff around it that changes it. I mean, Tony does stuff. I do writing with him, and he'll play something, and he'll sort of do this repeating thing that allows you to suggest different things on the bass, and you can take it to different places. And so it's quite nice. Tony's very aware that he's the guitarist in the band, and there's room for a bass player. Yeah. It's really nice. 3-pieces are great. I mean, like Rush. Sabbath's a 3-piece, really,
No, the ultimate 3-piece, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, like you think of Paranoid. Everybody always plays it in the lower position, but he's actually up here on the 12th fret, and it allows the bass to sit really nicely in there.
And then his lyric writing is insane. I mean,
Tony's?
No, Geezer. There was a song on the last album called Dear Father, and it was just something that Ozzy was playing with. It was like, oh, dear father, and Geezer was like, right, well, I know the melody Ozzy wants to do, and I know the chorus, and I've got this title, Dear Father. And he said, I've come up with this idea. And it was a Catholic altar boy in confession to the priest who was raping him, telling him he was going to kill him.
God.
And so the priest couldn't say anything about it because it was a confessional. He'd been abusing and Ozzy goes, Where the hell does that come from? Because all Ozzy had done was, oh, dear father, blah, blah. And Geezer really thinks about it. It's like, this is a really dark story.
That's a pretty metal lyric, if ever I heard.
Isn't it?
It's about as metal as it can get from Black Sabbath.
He's got Flash Gordon stuff in there because he was a huge fan of, Doctor Who's in there as well.
I like him even more.
It's brilliant. I sat one night and we were just talking about how we used to go to the movies on a Saturday morning and see Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
And going to Skywalker to see the premiere or something, It's a big kid.
I love the fact he's into Doctor Who as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to go up when they'd be doing sound check, I'd pop up and say hello and he'd be like, what do you think of the new Doctor Who then? It was all this, that was so non-metal. It's like really blowing it now for the fans. But
let's keep going. So what year are we at now?
So 2008 was The Devil You Know,
which
was the Ronnie album. 2009, that came out. I started working with this band from New Zealand who had heard the work I'd done on that. They got me over to do an album with them. They were called Sonic Alter. They were brilliant, really good band. And the singer Kane was, he'd grown up listening to Ozzy, Bruce Dickinson and Ronnie. So he'd got this voice that was all of them.
Fantastic.
And a brilliant writer. So I spent most of 2010, end of 2009, I started the actual recording out in New Zealand, came back. And actually, it was as I flew to New Zealand, Ronnie's diagnosis came out. He'd collapsed on stage in rehearsals for his tour, his solo tour. So then he went downhill very quickly, and there was a tribute concert to him that we all worked on at Hyde Park. No, not Hyde Park, Victoria Park, High Voltage it was called. And then shortly after that, Sharon got in touch with Tony and said, I think Ozzy would like to talk. And so by the end of, Tony and I immediately started and Tony and Geezer had sat down and we'd all talked, and they said, it'd be nice to do something with the original lineup. So we then went on and started writing again. And between Christmas and New Year, Sharon and Ozzy came up and we played them all the demos we'd got. And Ozzy was just like jaw on the floor going, this is incredible. And it was at the beginning of 2011, they had the meeting with Rick and the whole band to see if they could push it forward. And so that became the beginning of the 13 album.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So 13, what was the Rick Rubin experience for you?
That was good fun, actually. It was initially quite daunting because it was like, oh my God, how's this going to work for a start? Tony was like, how's this going to work? Rick had wanted to work with them ever since they got together back in 2000, 2001. They did a reunion tour. And they put some songs together, but Rick wasn't inspired by them, and it all fell by the way. So then the Osbournes TV show happened, so that didn't continue. So they ended up having this meeting with Rick, and Tony said to Sharon and Rick, Mike's my guy. And they said, no, absolutely, we can do as much up at Ozzy's studio, it'd be great, he can deal with it. So I was involved very much from the start, and we just did songwriting part, working through things, backwards and forwards to England, back, here and there. And Rick would come down, I think the first month, we came out for a month initially, and I think we saw him once, or Tony saw him, took some demos up. Because at that point, Rick was very much everybody needs to play together. So I depped on bass for a week because Geese and Bill were off doing some other bits. So it was Tommy, Ozzy's drummer, me on bass, Ozzy and Tony. So we were just going through this stuff, working on the songs, a bit like at home, but I'm in the room with Ozzy staring at me. And then we worked through it, and then backwards and forwards. And as the songs started to happen, Rick would come down and make some comments, but kind of left us alone. And we were due to start in the January of 2012, but it was December 2011 that Tony got the cancer diagnosis. So that got put on hold. Ozzy and Geezer came back to the UK to see Tony, and we just carried on writing in the UK and pushed the songs forward. Fortunately, Tony had a live room at his studio, so we could set up a little PA and just work. And then through the summer, just after the 2012 Olympics, we all reconvened, and it was like, yeah, we're getting there. We reckon it's about time to to get in the studio. So Rick had just bought Shangri-La, I think, at that point, and suggested we get in there and start recording. And again, Tony said, you know, is Mike going to be involved? And Rick's like, yeah, he's part of the project. He'll become part of the team. So Greg Fiddleman was lead engineer, and I was there to kind of liaise between the English and the Americans. Or more like the humorous Brummies and the Americans that didn't get the sense of humour.
Yeah.
And in the middle of the mix was poor Brad Wilk from Rage Against the Machine, who's like, they're funny, but I don't understand what's going on.
Right.
He was brilliant. He was absolutely awesome.
Brad's lovely. I've recorded him here.
Yeah, he's a great drummer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect choice.
Probably makes perfect sense for them. Because he's also pretty working class. He grew up in LA and he didn't grow up wealthy. No. So identifies quite heavily with sort of working class guys from Birmingham.
And he was a brilliant choice. Rick said, I think he's the guy. Yeah. And the initial resistance was, will he pick it up enough? Will, you know, Rage Against the Machine, is that right? And Rick said, trust me. And I remember Rick coming down. It was one of the few conversations where I was in a room on my own with Rick, and he came down, and Brad was in Ozzy's room with the guys. And he said, I really want this to work. I think this will be good. I went, I think it sounds brilliant. You know, I didn't blow smoke up his ass because I'm all for the band. And I said, I think it's great. I think he's exactly the guy. He's going to take a while to pick it up because these are complicated songs. You know, I mean, Sabbath have never done anything where it's expected. You know, there'll be a 7/4 bar in there, or a quick. It's like a 3/4 of a beat break before they go into something, because that's how Tony feels it, and people have to follow it. And Brad was absolutely fantastic, really, really good, fun as well. But the look on his face, he'd walk in every morning and he'd be like, and Tony would go, "Oh, you look a bit worried." Do I? And then Geezer would go, "Oh, yeah, you definitely look worried." "No, I'm not worried." And they just wound him up all the way through. But he was great. He got it, and he's powerful. The groove. Everybody who hated the album would always criticise the fact that he didn't have Bill's swing. But the band loved him, and Rick loved him, and he did a great job. And you know what it's like. You put an album out. The album doesn't go out unless everybody is happy with it. Sure. So you know they're not just going, "Oh, that'll do." Yeah. And you don't actually do it for the fans. You do it for yourselves. So very important. Yeah, it was just a very different vibe, but it was nice because it was Rick putting us into his environment and letting the band do what they needed to do, which was play live together.
And it was done at his studio?
Yeah, Shangri-La. So when it was such an extended period, when we first talked about it, and he was like, Tony was like, "Where do you think we'll record?" He said, "Oh, I like this place over on just across the, you know, over in the valley, or no, over in Malibu, because we were up in Calabasas, so just down by the ocean." And by the time we got around to recording it, he bought it because it was for sale, and whoever had it before wanted to make sure it stayed as a studio. So we ended up in there.
I'm guessing Neve console?
No, API.
Oh, an API.
API, because I think it had been there for years, but there was a few channels of it being used for pre's, but there was an awful lot of rental going on. There was Neve, lots of Neve and stuff. But you could record them through a Mackie and it would sound the same.
I like to hear that. Yeah.
Well, you could. I mean, it's Black Sabbath. Screw that up. You know, it's like it's the sound of them. So, yeah, real straightforward stuff. The console, Rick would sit on a Swiss ball at the console with the microphone and just listen while stuff was going on, and he had a few faders in front of him for if he wanted to just affect the balance, but generally he was just listening for performance and tempos and things like that, because there was no clicks, everything live, which is that's how I prefer to record. I try to get any band I work with to at least give it a go. I always want them to play together, and if we can avoid using a click, it's better.
Especially for them, because that's probably how they would have cut the albums in the first place.
Yeah, because there's something about Tony's built-in feel. The riffs are how he feels them, therefore he shouldn't be constrained by something telling him. You know, the end of a riff could be slower. It's how it comes out. And that's the tough part when we're writing together, is we're doing it in Pro Tools with a click because that's all we've got. And even recently we've been going, it would just be nice to get in a studio with a drummer to see where this is going, you know, if this is something that is a song for a singer or whatever. So yeah, it's quite a hard one. So it was, for me, I thought it was quite liberating. It was really unusual for them because the Devil You Know had been done all to clicks. You know, it had been that thing where it was pulling the album together and everybody was happy with things that had happened during songwriting. Therefore, why don't we just, you know, get them to play it, but we can use bits that have been done and fly them in. And I don't think they even kind of really realised that back in the day we used to fly things in off tape and didn't have grids and stuff. You know?
Yeah.
Half inch to 2 inch was fun. So, yeah. So 13 was a brilliant experience from that point of view. It was a really, it was different. I remember writing a small diary to myself at the time, just trying to absorb the experience of being around Rick. What was
the signal change, you remember, on Tony's guitars?
It was as many amps as they could fit, amps and cabs as they could rent in to try and cover their bases. Yeah. But generally it was 57s and 421s and possibly the odd large diaphragm. But to be honest, it was so fragmented by the time they were deciding, because Rick was working a lot with Greg, and it was like this, let's analyse what went on the first album, and and there was a lot of second guessing of stuff going on, and using really old Laneys when Tony got the amp he liked. You know, there was all this going on, and so the compromise was that the doubles were all being done with the sound that Tony liked, but the initial stuff was being done combinations of old Marshalls and Laneys and whatever to get that authentic old sound. Yeah. And I was saying to Christian earlier about the Age of Reason track. The solo was just cut off the floor, which was amazing. We persuaded Tony to keep the solo. Because I don't do that, and you do it live. You know how to solo over something, and he really opened up to that idea. So it was cool. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite a different thing teaching the old dog new tricks at that point. I mean, it's 10 years ago, so he would have been 64, and still open to whatever suits the song, whatever will make it better. He's open to.
What was his preferred amp at the time?
He had his TI 100. That's what we'd been working on. They brought in some old Laneys, and he said, I don't even know if that's what I used to use, he said, but, you know, okay, fine, put them up. But they blew up. We always laugh with the Laney guys. It's like they were in there for about 10 minutes and Tony's like, told you. But as long as the flow doesn't get halted, the band are happy. You know, they're in there. They're very much field players. You know, it's like we had a table in the live room with a boiling water thing, so we could all make cups of tea, and we had fruit and all of the stuff that just enabled the live room to be the clubhouse.
Great.
And the conversations would go on in there. And I'm very much anti-talkback. I mean, I quite like the newer SSLs where when you're recording, the moment you stop Pro Tools, talkback opens up in both directions. There's always communication. But I would always walk to the door, because at Shangri-La, the control room's slightly up. It's about 4 or 5 steps up from the live room, and I'd always just be over to the door and open it so that we could all talk. Yeah. Because it's like headphones off. Yeah, let's talk about that. You know, so it's got to be that free-form conversation.
Jack Douglas always uses that same thing, clubhouse.
Yeah.
He always talks about it has to be a clubhouse.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It needs to be. It's and that's what I try to bring to all productions is, okay, budgets aren't there to allow people to spend months making a record, but it doesn't mean you can't go into rehearsal rooms and get it right and then go in and blast a record in a week as a band. And instantly you get this instant gratification of everything coming together. And then you get a vocal on it and you know what you need to do after that. As opposed to this, the vocalist's not ready, let's just stick loads of guitars on top because we've got to fill the space. It's like, how about actually see what the story's telling needs? You know, let's see how we move it forward. So, yeah, I think that was a big thing. Always learning, and the Rick thing was a massive learning curve.
In what respect?
Just absorbing how someone that really didn't have to think about technicalities. He just wanted to listen and see what would make the album fit his idea of what a Black Sabbath album should be. Even down to the fact there were 15 songs and only 8 made it on the album. And then there was an extra 3 on a bonus, and then another few went on as, you know, little extra things on the tour CDs. It was all that kind of thing. It was like, no, this album needs to really be that thing that follows the first album. And I think he took it too far sometimes, you know.
In what respect?
I do remember, I'll get in trouble for this, I do remember them sitting there the one day, there was a song, I can't even remember what it was called, but it was meant to be, it was called Zeitgeist in the end, which was Planet Caravan revisited almost.
Sure.
So I gave it the working title Moon Winnebago, because it was like Planet, Moon, Caravan, Winnebago. And he hated that. He was like, do we have an alternate title for this? You know, and no, he was like all very serious. The rest of the band are wetting themselves. Yeah. But I remember one night they were listening to the playback of the day's tracking, and A-Bing it with Planet Caravan, trying to get the panning the same. And I was like, don't try and recreate what was just something that happened, you know, organically, I've used the word, but happened organically in the past. Yeah. You know, let the song be what it needs to be. You know, even to the point where it was the Leslie vocal again, it's like, a little bit too twee. Yeah. But that, I guess, in that respect, he's a fan. And he had Black Sabbath at his beck and call. So, great. And a lot of people give him shit. And he has his idiosyncrasies, but, you know, he did make some decisions that totally turned that album into something that it wouldn't have been if they'd been left to their own devices. So, yeah.
But I'm a huge fan of, I love Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules. Heaven and Hell in particular. Just what a masterpiece.
Oh, totally.
I mean, Neil Knights is one of my favourite guitarists of all time. Just
Lonely as the Word is one of my favourite songs. It's just, because, again, I discovered Sabbath backwards. So did I.
Because we're at that age group where we're like 13, 14, 15.
Grohl's the same.
It's the end of that period when Ronnie's in the band.
Exactly.
Because 1980, we're 13.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's brilliant. I mean, that's the thing as well. You've got a band that has a 50-year career. Yeah. They're going to have moments where you're going to pick up people and put them down, and that's the beauty of it. And I think that's why they have to be authentic and true to themselves. Yeah. You know, you can't try and hold a fan base all the way through. You'll get some, but you'll lose people. I'm a huge Rush fan, but I'm sort of like Farewell to Kings through to Signals, really. Yeah,
yeah, you know? Yeah, me too.
Again, we said about it earlier, you know, nowadays artists aren't given enough time to develop. Yeah. There was time for people to find their audience. Yeah. You know, and I think... amazingly, it got very commercial, and now it's not commercial at all because there's no money in the business. Yeah, you know, it's really odd, isn't it? It's like, but I think people are starting to find their thing again, and it's almost cottage industry again.
Which isn't a million miles away from what it was.
No,
we think of some of the most influential bands of all time. I remember reading, it was probably 10 years ago now, but Loaded, Velvet Underground, finally went platinum. Yeah, like 50 years later, you know, and I love that. I don't remember whose quote it was. I know John Peel repeated it. Maybe it was John Peel's quote, but he said, "Not many people bought Velvet Underground records, but everybody that did started a band." Yeah, I mean, you know, those guys like Iggy and Lou Reed. I mean, they're some of the most influential artists of all time. Oh, totally. Have sold a fraction of the records of other artists. Yeah. Tony's a big one though for me. I mean. I loved his guitar playing I love his guitar playing because it makes sense to my brain. Yeah, you know, once you work out his riffs. But you were talking about not wanting to dissect songs that you grew up just like holding up. I'm like that about Brian May with the guitar playing. Even though he's my favorite guitar player outside of Jeff Beck and Tony, I have never learned his parts. No. Because I don't want to ruin it. To me, it's just magic, and I'll keep it magic. Yeah, I think you need to have that thing of just like let it wash over you and experience it. Don't try and be it. Someone said to me, who they ask you through your career, who would you like to work with? Like maybe 20 years ago, I'd have said I'd love to work with Pink Floyd, but I think they did okay without me.
you know. So, you know, it's like there's a time where people work with people, and it's either right or wrong for that. And that's why I'm lucky. I've worked with Tony 26 years. So
Incredible.
I'm doing something that there's a symbiosis there, which is lovely. And I don't aspire to work with anybody, really. You know, I've been lucky to work with some of the bands that I have.
What about producers? Is there anybody you'd love to just be the engineer for? You think you could pick up some stuff?
Yeah, I mean, again, you know, Bob was brilliant. Bob Marlette, he was hilarious. He was brilliant. He took me under his wing because he couldn't bring his guy over from LA, so I was his guy. I learnt a lot of him about not being frightened of creating magic in the studio. I worked with a guy called Pat Collier, English guy. I'm trying to think what bands he'd done. He had a studio in London called The Greenhouse, and his knee VR had caught fire, so he had to come up and work with a band with me. And he was just so unafraid of tape. He was like, "Oh, let's do this. Oh, yeah, well, why don't we just cut this and we'll copy that over there and then turn the tape out. We'll do a backward reverb." No, that didn't work. Put it back, you know, flying stuff off tape. And I'm like, this is brilliant. I'm just learning how stuff should work. In terms of people doing amazing stuff, most of them are probably my contemporaries now, and I can call them friends. So I love being in a studio when someone else is working. I don't know if I'd particularly want to engineer for them, because again, they're probably doing okay with their own thing.
Right.
You know, I love just absorbing it. I'll sit and watch for hours and just think, yeah, this is fun. This is the best place you could want to be if you like music. I
remember a few years ago when John Leckie's manager was still alive, Safta. I don't know if you've met Safta. Great guy. He was at a label I was at, and I just said, you know, if you ever need anybody to make cups of tea for John, just want to be while he's making a record, just want to learn. It's there's just certain people I admire that are attached to records I love. You know, but at the same time, it's the artist that brings it.
It is, and also it's like a friend of mine always says, mixing's not a spectator sport. Now, I know it's not all about mixing. A lot of people think mixing is the most important thing. The production is where it happens.
Agreed, yeah.
We were lucky enough, we went over to Bob Clearmountain's the other day to mix this, and he played us a mix, and I just thought...
Was it the Joe Bonamassa in...
It was.
In Atmos?
Yeah.
Wasn't it absolutely amazing?
It was stunning, but I was taken aback by a couple of things. One was that how tastefully he did the Atmos. Although, I said to him, you said you don't fly things about. He said, well, I do it sometimes. Yeah. But the punch that was coming from the front, it was all about the band, but just enhanced.
Yeah.
The vocals just sounded so up front, and yet there wasn't a hint of harshness. It was just this beautiful mix. And I thought, if I'd been there while he was doing that, I could have derailed that, because he'd have felt probably he wanted to talk to you, or you might want to ask him something. And if you break that flow that created that masterpiece, so it's a funny thing, isn't it? It's like you've got to get into that headspace to do your best work, and that's why I think working with other people, it's a weird thing. You've got to build that relationship. That's why I love taking it from songwriting all the way through to the final mix, because...
So are you getting songwriting credits on these records?
Yeah, I've just started doing more stuff with Tony, and there's songwriting stuff going on now. Thank you. Yeah, it's he loves all the orchestrations and the keyboardy stuff. He's always worked well with keyboard players. Jeff Nichols was a really, really good friend of his. He came in to play bass when Geese had left for a short while, and then Tony liked him so much that he said, do you know how to play keyboards? And he went, well, I can learn.
Yeah.
And again, it's something to play off, and we did a thing, I mean, funnily enough, it was for an aftershave Tony was launching last year, and this Italian perfume magnate said, I'd love you to do a perfume, and so we did this piece of music called Scent of Dark, and we got string players in and did all of that, and it was one of the first times that Tony had just gone, oh, you can do it, and I went, what, because you can't be bothered? He goes, no, I want you to do this, you know, and his manager said, we want to give you a percentage, and you know, going forward, because Tony's really comfortable now that we got it in-house. And so that was a big thing for me. Yeah,
fantastic.
Because we've worked well over the years, and I've never been upset by anything that's gone on. It's always like I've been the guy that's been able to sit and hand over to Geezer, or I've sat and watched Ronnie and Tony try to, in the nicest way, one up each other. It's like, well, if you do that, I could do this, and you watch a song go from brilliant to like, it's just incredible. And yet they've got this. The true masters of their art have got this thing that they know when to stop. Mm-hmm. They don't chase something forever. They just go, yeah. It's anticlimactic, the end of a mix with these guys. Yeah, I think we got that.
Right.
Really? Yeah. Okay, quick.
Actually sounds quite English to me.
Very much so, yeah. I think it's funny. It's like, again, because I'm lucky, I've learned off some people that have been doing it for so long. Mm-hmm. You understand, it's not matter of fact to them, but nothing phases them. They've been doing it so long. They're very relaxed about it. I learned very early on just to communicate. So, I got Ronnie or Rob Halford in a vocal booth. Like, guys, I'm going to be 10 minutes. I've just got some stuff. Oh, okay. All right, I'll go make a cuppa. That's fine. Do you want a cuppa? Yeah, I wouldn't mind. You get on with it. I'll be ready in a couple of minutes. So if you want to warm up, whatever, and then you're ready to go. As long as you keep them going, and then they're like, that's great. No, we'll do an hour of vocals, and then bang. As long as you keep them informed, they know when to be in the zone, because it's their job to be there to sing. And they know there's a process you have to go through. If you're panicking and going, oh yeah, I'm ready. No, I wasn't really ready. You just got to go, you've got to be professional. You've got to know what to do and learn the characteristics. And I think that's a massive part of production, is the communication with people. It's the psychological aspect of it.
Yeah, very well said.
It's, I always say it's 98% psychology. And we learn this. We learn how to do this. And then we have to switch it off. It becomes what we do naturally. And, we have to fix problems. And again, you don't have to shield the artist from them. You go, channel's gone down, just a minute. Yeah. Because if they've been working in any studio for 50 years, they know that shit goes down. Sometimes it's Ozzy sat with a pint of water on a console at A&M and reversing into it and shutting the console down. That wasn't when I was there. That was one of Bob's. They weren't happy with it. I don't think I literally think Ozzy was there, and he, and everybody's going, no. He went into one of the other studios and laid down on the sofa and fell asleep, and the band didn't kick him out because they were like, it's Ozzy Osbourne in our room.
What are you working on at the moment?
There was a couple of Judas Priest albums. Yeah, straight off the back of 13, I went in and produced Redeemer of Souls with Glenn, which was a bit of a bittersweet thing, because he got diagnosed with Parkinson's about 3 months in. So that was a bit of a stressful time for him. Yeah. And it was a weird time, because I went from this period in the States of joy and then into isolation. So I ended up at the end of that album, about 14 months of that, I ended up having a breakdown and getting hospitalised, nearly dead, and came out of that the other side, and then went in about a year later with Andy Sneap and Tom Allen and did another Priest album. And that was brilliant, because it was like, yeah, got through that demon exercise. So I was very lucky again. I've done a couple of really good Priest albums. And
what if you don't mind me asking, what do you think caused the breakdown?
I'll be flippant and say it was Glenn. It was Glenn Tipton. No, it was a combination of things. I went from, because I'm a huge mental health advocate now, I've lived through what I see a lot of people living through. Mm-hmm. So I'd spent 2 years on the Tony project. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, the Sabbath project, prior to that, Ronnie had died. So there's a big processing there going on. Tony got cancer in the middle of the Sabbath album. So I'm watching the big guy of, the god of metal, becoming this slightly shrunken guy, under healing blankets and all this. And then Glenn gets diagnosed with Parkinson's. And I'd come off a very, very happy time. But by the end of this, that we'd done a lot of this album where Richie would come over and do some stuff, Scott would come over and do some stuff, Ian would, Rob would, and then we were in here. And Glenn is very, very meticulous. We spent 4 days trying every amp and cab in the building on the same riff.
Yeah.
So
were you running a loop DI, or was he continually playing?
No, it was just a loop thing. Yeah. And I mean, his tech and I were just going, we don't know, Glenn. No, it's okay. I've got an idea. And he's actually barking mad. He's lovely, Glenn. But by the end of it, I'd just gone so far down that rabbit hole of isolation and just pressure. And eventually we delivered the record in New York to Sony, and the relief was like, great. Adrenaline stopped, and that was it. Crash. And that was the start of 9 months of living hell, really. It was just depression, anxiety, it was all coming out. And
some things you'd suppressed for many years.
Yeah, it was just, and it was high pressure situations. It was things like being put into the situation of coming to the US to work with Rick Rubin. You know, you go, yeah, I can brave that. I'm with my mates. You know, Tony's got faith in me. But when you look back on it, it's actually easy to just keep pushing this under with lots and lots of adrenaline. And there's no regret about any of it, because it then gave me the confidence to come back from it and learn an awful lot. And I learnt, my production changed massively from an empathy point of view, because also my inner monologue completely disappeared. I have no filter. I'm doing really well today with the stories, but yeah, it really changed things. It became the whole the humanity of making records.
I understand. Really I know what you mean by the inner monologue, because when you're doing that, you're not in the moment.
No. Yeah, so it's been great, and so between then and now, in the middle of the second pre-stamp, so 2014 was breakdown year. 2015 I came back from it, and I think it was 2016, maybe 2017, whenever it was. We were in the middle of making the last Priest album, and I got a call to say they were mixing the final Sabbath shows, and there was an issue with something, so I got brought in to do that. So I ended up finally getting to do the full Sabbath mix, and it was brilliant. That went out on cinema, in cinema, and it was this wonderful thing of having been at that final concert. I got to have the final say on what they sounded like.
Amazing.
And it was really good. I was mixing it as an album, and then someone said, "Should we stick the TV or the monitor on?" I'm like, "What?" And there's the 25 camera footage being shown. I was like, wow, this is really good. And it was an Eagle Rock thing, and the director was hilarious. He was, God, I wish I could remember his name. He did the final Zeppelin movie, when they got back together, the one I was talking about earlier. He directed that. Dick Carruthers, his name is. He was brilliant, massive Sabbath fan. And this was just a wonderful thing to rejuvenate me. And then we carried on with the Priest album. So that year was just stunning. And from then it's just been production after production, working with Tony on things, doing bands, small, large, whoever. And just taking it back to the basics all the time. Have you got songs? Let's rehearse them. Let's do the song tweaking in the rehearsal rooms. Let's get in and have fun. And letting people use real amps, and we use a lot of reactive load stuff now, so that they can all play together. And I don't ever think that it's a guide track. It's always a keeper until someone screws up, because especially with three pieces, the communication you get from people looking at each other. You can't punch in. Well, you can punch in, but you can't replicate that with playing to a click or even looking at the screen. It's that moment in the room where everybody just does that little thing.
So you're talking about the reactive load stuff.
Yes.
Is there any particular pieces of gear that you are loving? Some of this newer stuff? Because obviously that's a more modern
so approach. I'm
looking for tips, basically.
I would rather have Spill in a room and deal with it with edits because like we always did, it's like, I mean, going off grid, but the Queen News of the World documentary with Bob Harris, you know, they're in the room, Freddie's at the piano, Roger's at the drums, you know, they're all just playing. That's the kind of thing where you go, it doesn't matter about spill, because if everybody plays together, it's the right parts. So I've always gone in with that ethic, and it's like, okay, if there's a problem, we'll just run that chorus again and cut that half a bar in from another take or whatever. So I've always approached it that way. Sometimes the rooms are just too small. So you go with Kempers, fractals and helixes, but some guitarists can't get on with the wallpapering the whole way through the letterbox system. You know, it's like, I really want to get in. So thankfully, over the last couple of years, reactive loads. I love the
wallpaper.
It is, isn't it? It's like the old synths, isn't it? I mean, it's like, look, that Eventide's not an easy thing to get access to.
DX7s, like the little tiny little LCD screen, and you have this, you go programming on this.
It's not an interactive experience. That's why we like these. So that whole, the Kemper thing, all of those are great. They're all a tool, but some people don't get on with that. So in the last couple of years, just having things like Capture X's. So someone brings in an amp. It's got a you go out of the amp into a reactive load with cab sim in it, and then you can change mic positions, change cabs. Guitarist is there. They can tweak their amp. It's their system. There's been things like the Sequus Mother load for years. You know, all these things, but these are now systems where you can go, right, I'm going to keep a DI, I'm going to keep the amp output so I can recab it later, and I can actually have the microphone, the virtual mics. So you can do an awful lot of work where the guitarist is getting, again, that instant gratification. They're hearing it through headphones, what they need to hear. There's that feeling, albeit without the low end of the cab, but there's a drummer in the room providing low end. They really like it, guitarists. Then the other things that are impressing me at the moment, and a lot of amp manufacturers are now incorporating 2-notes technology into it. So Laney have just released a little amp with 2 notes in it.
Yep.
Victory have had them for a while. I've got a Kraken, which is brilliant. It's a real high gain thing. It's tubes, Class D amp, but doesn't matter because it's got the 2 notes in it. And more recently, I've been using the Origin Effects stuff. So they've got little amps, which they're sort of like an amp in a box. They're completely analog, but they're like a Marshall Plexi and an old Laney, or they do a hot rodded version, and you just have to put the output of that into an amp, and it's got an EQ output, so you can run it into a Marshall 4x12 or a Fender Twin. But these are amps. These are front end amps that run on your pedal board, or you can put them into an IR capture device. So there's loads of ways of doing it, and you basically just get a feel for what the guitarist's up for, because you put them in control, they're comfortable. And I've always involved the guitar player in the process of finding out what the best speaker is. Sneap told me that, Andy Sneap, years ago. He said, this is going to take a while, and take a DI, run a loop, reamp it, go in and put 57 on the center of the cone. Do the same thing on the next cone, same thing on every single speaker. Listen to them back and involve the guitarist in the process. So you've got this psychological thing where guitarist is used to having the amp blaring, doing the trouser flapping. Get them into the control room and bring them into the process of choosing which is the best sounding speaker. Now, they're not thinking about what it sounds like in the live room. They're thinking about what's the best sounding speaker coming through these speakers. So A, you're giving them time. You're investing time in them, and you're also getting them used to the idea their sound needs to fit in with the rest of the band. The moment you do that, they're on side. It's no longer a fight of like, oh, he's trying to pull one over on me by doing this. It's like, no, we will get something like that guitar sound, but it's never going to sound the same as your amp feels to you in the room. So let's get the one you like. So again, it's down to psychology. So whatever tool I can use to do that is the one to use. And I'm not frightened of any of the plugins. There's great ones, Neural, STL Tones, all of those. They're brilliant. But it's what engages the player to do their best work.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That makes absolute perfect sense.
Same with vocal mics. Ronnie James Dio loved an 87. He had a harsh voice. It's a harsh mic. but that's what he wanted to sing through, so we had to deal with it. And it cut through brilliantly as well. But you've got to put that person in a comfort zone, so that's all that matters to me.
If the performance is brilliant, you can deal with the fact that it might not be the perfect recording. The performance will always trump the recording.
Well, it's Freddie in the later days with a Beta 58 in the back of the control room with the main monitors up, walking up and down, strutting, for his audience. Yeah. That's where it comes from, isn't it?
Yeah. I always saw him, not always, but I saw him a couple of times on C12As.
Yeah.
Yeah, so... And I tried, when I was recording Mark Martell, it was a lot of the voice of Freddie in the movie. Yeah. I tried thinking, a C12A would be the perfect mic for him. It wasn't. It wasn't. Because even though he sounds a lot like him, he's not him.
No.
And just subtle differences. I mean, Freddie's mid-range is the most powerful mid-range in the history of the world.
Yeah. That's the Ronnie thing. It was that. It was a bark.
Yeah.
And you think with the amount of mid-range that's coming out of Brian's AC30s, something had to push against that. Yeah. And we weren't they lucky? They had Roger Taylor and Brian May and Freddie to do the vocals. Yeah, and John just wrote like half a dozen songs, of which 4 of them are some of the biggest songs ever in the history of music. Yeah. I've got another one bites the dust. Man. I mean, and I Want to Break Free. What a song. Yeah. Oh, I mean, what a song. Spread Your Wings. Yeah. Wow. So Judas Priest, we touched a little bit on it, and I think we may have got a lot of it. So that's pre-Andy, isn't it? So that's pre-Andy Sneap. Yeah, so the first Priest album I did was Redeemer of Souls, which was polarising for the fans. But it was okay. Why? It's the guitar sounds. Glenn, it was the first album Richie was on, but he didn't have as much say, and Glenn wanted this very, very Glenn sound, which he's very much about process guitar sounds, and so it was a strange one. It was really good. There's some great songs on it, but it was a long process. So yeah, that was good. It was a good album, and the first time working with Rob, which was awesome because he's brilliant. Yeah. He's funny because it's like he'll come in and we'll break for lunch, watch a bit of Alan Partridge, and go and do a bit more, and then come out and have some tea and cake. I would argue that he might be the most versatile rock singer ever. He's got so many different voices, and an incredible Queen fan. Oh, how nice to hear. Because I did his Christmas album, Metal Christmas, called, what was it called? Celestial. And he's like, how far shall we take this, Mike? And I said, well, this one sounds like it could do with a few Freddie vocals. You're talking my language. How far can we push it? So we had 36 tracks of vocals. Nice. Or I'm going back and re-listening. Oh, it's so him. But he has so many personalities. He does, yeah. Well, he's like Billy Joel. Billy Joel has 3 voices. Yeah. It's incredible how versatile these people are. Rob can be like almost a pop singer and then go out into like... Yeah, he's brilliant. And just an absolute darling, just so caring. And, the first time you meet him, he's like, hello, Mike, how are you? Pleased to meet you. How's Tony doing? It's like, it's just that. They're all from the same time. I mean, he depped for Ozzy twice. No, he depped for Ronnie once and Ozzy once. Oh, wow. He sang a show when Ronnie quit. Right. And he sang a Sabbath show, and then Ozzy had a bad voice once on an Ozfest, and Rob came in and sang a Sabbath. Of course I'll sing, Tony. You're my favourite band. Amazing. Yeah, so that was great. Lovely. And then a few years later, same thing. Andy's in the running, and Glenn's like, but I want you involved, Mike. I'm like, great. Andy and I get on like a house on fire. And we're bringing Tom in to be the overseer. To shake the cutlery drawer and choose the wine list, Yeah. And Tom was absolutely fantastic. He knew exactly what was needed for vocals. Just really brilliant. It was a really nice dovetailing of everybody. Now, drums for Judas Priest, because you've got probably one of the greatest current rock drummers. Yeah. He might be the best rock drummer of his generation. Phenomenal. Is there anything specific about recording him? No, I have to laugh when you ask that, because I do mentoring at a couple of universities and colleges, and when people are going, oh, you know, are you sure we're allowed to use this many mics? I go, we had 33 on Scott.
Wow.
Because Andy, again, was capturing everything from a point of view. We spent 2 days taking Scott's kit apart, putting mic mounts inside Tom's so we could do external and internal for different sounds. And so we had 7 toms, so there's 14. Then there's 2 kick drums, so there's another 4. There's 2 hi-hats, so there's another 2. And then there was like 4 overheads, you know, and every cymbal spot mics and then room mics. And I went, Andy, you know, we're up to 33. It was great.
Nice.
You know, and it's not stupid. It's just like, you're going for choice, aren't you? You've got Scott for a month.
Yeah.
And that was another good one because Glenn was already suffering, so he couldn't stand up and play all the time. But it was lovely. Ian would come in every morning and go up to his station. He'd fire up his computer and he'd start learning, a bit like Geezer was doing, learning the parts. And then Richie, Scott and Ian would go out into the room and just play. So it was tracked live with lots of going back and fixing because it's more of a metal album than a Sabbath album. But it was just like, again, that thing of like, wow, they really enjoyed themselves because they were playing together as a band again. And Scott really got off on it because he'd gone through quite a few albums of just click track, play to what's there. So it's nice. We felt like it was bringing it back. That's another reason for having Tom back in, because he hadn't worked with them since, I guess it would have been Turbo, the one before Painkiller, which, you know, I'm not a massive Priest aficionado. So,
No.
Painkiller was a huge change.
Massive change.
Yeah.
When Scott's in the band, suddenly it's like, wow.
And Chris Sangarides is in the chair. And so to bring Tom back in and have this weird thing of like Andy, me, Tom, and we just got on like a house on fire. It was a good project. And it sold brilliantly. The fans loved it. It was like, God, it's a young band again.
Yeah.
And it was Richie's first real big songwriting. He really stamped his mark on it, and it became that. It's a real shame about Glenn, because thinking about it going forward, it would have been, you know, a great. He was a rejuvenation anyway. But Andy was fantastic, and it was like, I think 3 weeks of rehearsal for the tour, and I think on the last day of the 3 weeks, Glenn went, I don't think I can do the tour, guys. Oh. But it was really fun because that's fucking typical you, Glenn. And Andy goes, okay, no, thanks, Glenn. I've got to learn the set in like 2 weeks or whatever. But yeah, he realised he'd been a little bit in denial about it. And
what year is this?
This is only probably 2018.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
So I saw that tour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And fair play to Andy for going out, and
Andy nailed it.
he did. I mean,
Richie's incredible, but
well, I got to say,
Andy's pretty incredible himself.
And Richie was Richie plays with his pick is about the thick. I don't know. It's probably about 1/8 of an inch thick. He plays 12s or 13s. I mean,
he does.
He's like he's a monster, but he's not just shreddy. He is bluesy, and he's just one of the most versatile, accurate guitarists I've ever worked with.
I mean, I get a feeling he's a huge Glenn Tipton fan.
I guess, but he was shitting himself when he knew he'd have to play the Painkiller solos.
Right.
He was like, I don't know if I can do this. Yeah. He was a Schenker fan. Schenker was his big one. But he's totally nailed it.
Well, so, I mean, I just wonder if he was a fan because he pulls it off so well.
Yeah. He's studious as well, you know, he knows what he's got to do. He lives it. His dad said, you know, he bought him a guitar when he was really young. He said he just literally lived with that guitar. It was all he wanted to do.
Amazing.
And he nearly missed the call. Well, he ignored the call because he couldn't believe it was Judas Priest trying to get in touch with him.
Tell me about, what's the story on that?
Well, because when KK left,
they
were trying to get hold of, they were going to use the guy that plays with Asia. And he said, it's not really my sort of thing, but my mate is brilliant. He was playing with Lauren Harris, Steve Harris's daughter's band from Iron Maiden. So this guy gave management Richie's number, and he was like, yeah, of course. yeah, they're trying to get in touch with me. And it was literally like, phone them back. They want to get in touch. He was, oh shit, really? So he went for a little audition, and he went upstairs. He was warming up at Glenn's studio, and apparently Glenn was down. He's got a barn, and he was downstairs with his tech going, he's really good, this guy. And apparently when Glenn went upstairs, he fell apart. But he said this, I've been listening, don't you worry, lad.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny, isn't it? You just think, it can't be a call from them. Who's winding me up?
I've heard that from a couple of different people, those kinds of calls. People hanging up on people thinking that, they're pretending to be somebody. Yeah. Well, this has been amazing.
It's been really good fun.
Thank you ever so much for coming.
Absolute pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Please leave some comments and questions for Mike down below. Do you have your own YouTube channel or anything?
I don't, not one that's functional, but no, I've got my website and Facebook.
Okay, so, we'll leave all the links to that down below. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you ever so much. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Lovely to see you.
So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, toutes zines, adio, ciao, goodbye.